Welcome to our first video in the series on the urinary system, which unfortunately is one of the more neglected systems of the human body. Now, the primary organs of the urinary system are the kidneys, and the kidneys have a similar function to the liver in that their job is to remove any substances that are potentially toxic that are floating within the blood and remove them from the body every time that you produce urine. The second function is important in maintaining isotonic levels of salt within the body, and that is by removing extra salt that makes the blood hypertonic or potentially removing any extra water within the blood in the event that your blood is hypotonic. In these first two videos, we're going to be looking at the overall structure of the urinary system, as well as taking a deep dive into the structure of the functional unit in the kidneys, but that will happen in the next video. So in order to understand how the kidneys function, we need to look at the flow of blood from the kidneys, which starts with the largest blood vessel in the body as it carries blood away from the heart, and that, of course, is the aorta. From here, we can see that the aorta breaks into two smaller blood vessels, each of which leads into one of the two kidneys, and these are what we call your renal arteries. Whenever you see the word renal, this is in reference to the kidneys specifically, similarly to the way that cardiac refers to the heart. Now, within the kidney, this is where the blood that enters the kidney is filtered so that extra water and salt is removed, as well as any substances that can potentially be toxic. So after that process is completed, after the blood has been filtered, the waste that is removed from the blood, which we know as urine, is collected into this bottom part of the kidney here and transferred downward through a tube that we call the ureter. Now, the ureter eventually is going to lead to this storage organ located above the reproductive system, and this is what we call the urinary bladder, or just more commonly, the bladder. And the job of the bladder is to hold on to your urine until you have gotten to an opportune moment to release that urine out of the bladder in the process that we call urination. Now, in terms of the control of the bladder, just like with the digestive system, specifically the anus, we can find two sphincters that open and close to release or prevent the release of urine, and these are what we call your urethral sphincters, because they control entry of your urine into the tube, the urethra, which transports urine out of the body. And of course, the urethra is located within the penis in males and just above the opening of the vagina in females. Now, similarly to the anal sphincter, the bladder has two urethral sphincters because one of these is involuntary, meaning that you have no control over whether it opens or closes, and this is one way to detect whether you need to urinate and sends a signal to your brain that you need to go somewhere like a bathroom in order to get the urine out of your body. And then when you arrive at a location that allows you to safely or not embarrassingly urinate, the other sphincter, the outer sphincter, is voluntarily controlled, meaning that you do have the ability to open and close it and allow urine to escape the bladder. Now, in the walls of the bladder, as is the case with the walls of many organs, there are muscles that are found because the bladder needs to be able to relax in the event where it needs to expand its volume to hold more urine, but more importantly, these muscles can also contract in order to push urine out the urethral sphincters and eventually out the urethra. But in order to know when is the appropriate time to do this, the walls of your bladder also contain pressure sensors, which are effectively a form of sensory organs, and these send messages to your brain indicating that the urinary bladder is full, and therefore indicating that you need to get to the bathroom in order to not embarrassingly urinate. Now, that takes care of the release of waste, specifically urine, out of the body. But as we talk about the blood after the filtration has taken place, that blood needs to be returned to circulation. And blood is transported out of the kidneys in the direction that will cause it to move back to the heart. So if the blood vessels that transport blood into the kidneys are called renal arteries, these are what we would call the renal veins that connect the kidneys back to the vena cava, the largest vein in the body, and allow the filtered blood to make it all the way back up to the heart. Now, the final organ that we need to discuss isn't directly related to kidney function, but these two organs here are responsible for producing many of the hormones that are used to regulate kidney function, and these, as we talked about when we looked at the sympathetic nervous system, these are the adrenal glands, which can actually produce more than one hormone other than adrenaline, including one of the major regulatory hormones that are used by the kidneys. Now, if we take a more detailed look at the inside of the kidney, we can see that the kidney is broken into 3 different types of tissue depending on where they are located and what their function is. Let's follow the flow of blood into the kidney by starting from the renal artery, which is located right here at the base of the kidney like this. Now, when the renal artery flows inward to the kidney, the blood collects in this outermost layer of tissue that is found closest to the surface of the kidney, and these are what we call the renal cortex tissues. Now, inside of the renal cortex tissues, we can see that the renal artery and eventually the arterioles, the smaller arteries, break into the smallest type of blood vessels in the body, which become no longer visible. And these, of course, are the capillaries or capillaries, and this is particularly important because this is where the actual process of blood filtration, the removal of extra salt, extra water, and any toxins to the blood are basically squeezed out of the blood and enter the kidney tissue, which is, again, is what we call the renal cortex. Now, eventually, what we want to do in this area, because of the way that kidney filtration occurs, unfortunately, it's not only the waste that is squeezed out, but also all of the nutrients that oxygenated blood flowing into the kidney is carrying. Now, obviously, we don't want to remove every solute that exists in blood, so the way that the kidneys work is that they reabsorb all of the useful nutrients and basically leave all of the excess nutrients and toxins to be filtered out and removed via the ureter. And that brings us to this particular tissue in here that kind of looks like miniature fans. And this type of tissue is where most of the selective reabsorption of nutrients occurs. And this is a type of tissue called the renal medulla. And it's very important that this is not actually a completely solid structure and is very porous and allows fluid and aqueous solutes to move back and forth relatively easily, as this is key to the reabsorption process. Now, eventually, all of the nutrients, or I shouldn't say nutrients, all of the waste and extra salt and water is going to drain downward from the renal medulla into this central structure here at the center of the kidney. So the waste removed here is what we call filtrate. Again, this is all of the extra salt and water and all of the toxins that you don't want to remain inside of the body. And this area is what we call the renal pelvis, and we can see that the renal pelvis drains downward here. So here, all of the waste that we want to get rid of rather, exit through the ureter, and eventually that is going to end up in the bladder, while all of the purified blood, all of the blood that we filtered, all of the extra salt and water and toxins out of, is going to collect in this blood vessel here, or rather these blood vessels here, that combine together in order to form the renal vein. And again, the renal vein transports the purified blood out of the kidney and back into circulation. In part 2 of this video, we're going to look at the detailed structures that are microscopic within the kidney that represent the functional units of how kidney filtration works. And these, as we'll talk about in the next video, are what we call nephrons.